For 200 years, the work of Black journalists has been crucial to the lives of Black people in America. But the model for independent reporting is in decline, and disinformation prevails, targeted at Black communities. So we did something about it. We created a nonprofit network of local newsrooms anchored by a national hub, a different kind of news model for Black audiences, too often left behind, with stories too often untold. With our sustainable business model designed for the current market, we listen to and partner with the communities we serve to produce journalism that will expose injustice, inform policy, hold leaders to account, and equip Black audiences with the truth. Truth we deserve, news we need. Hi, and welcome to day 2 of Capital B's live inaugural event, The Power of Black Stories. I'm Akoto Foriata, co-founder and chief audience officer of Capital B. During yesterday's sessions, we talked about policing, evictions, climate, and a host of other issues. We heard from those using their time, talent, and personal stories to create real change in the world. Today, we'll continue the conversation, focusing on the work being done to center authentic Black storytelling for the masses. We hear from actor, director, and producer Tyler Perry, creator of the hit show Southside, Diallo Riddle, and journalists including Clint Smith and Errin Haines, among others. It's going to be a really good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us, and an extra special thank you to our sponsor, Reebok, who's helped making this all possible. If you aren't already a member, please consider becoming one by heading to capitalbnews.org and clicking the membership button. You can also sign up for our newsletter and email updates there. We're so happy to have you here. Please enjoy the program.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. I'm Jillian White, Senior Vice President of Revenue and Programming here at Capital B, and I'm joined by Kevin Maynard, Executive Editor for the LA Times, for a discussion about centering Black people and their stories. Kevin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Jillian. Glad to be here.
It's so good to see you.
Likewise.
So I actually wanted to start out with a very, very basic question for you. You've had such an illustrious career in journalism, but what made you, as a young Black man, want to become a journalist in the first place?
Wow, it was really reading the sports pages. You know, I was a sports fan growing up, and I had the fortune of the Washington Post being my hometown paper, you know, and where I grew up. And so there was a sports columnist. My name was Shirley Povich, very legendary columnist, and I read him, and it drew me to the pages, you know, and it also made me think that, well, maybe it was my 6th grade teacher really who first said, well, you love reading and writing and you like sports, maybe journalism could be a career. And I had not even thought what that was. And so that was the seeds.
Yeah. So when you joined journalism ranks, you know, what was the newsroom landscape like then in terms of diversity?
You know, it was dire, but here was the thing: there are always people to inspire you. There was really a great, dedicated group of journalists of color, Black journalists who were pioneering, and there were people that I looked to the Bob Maynards of the world, Nancy Hicks, Les Payne, you know, Asa Moore. They were pushing, Vernon Jarrett, they were pushing on the door. You know, they were advocating, they were trying to battle for more inclusion and for more Black journalists to get in. Dorothy Gilliam, people like that. And so those are inspirations, you know, and in part it led us to start a Black newspaper on a white university at Boston University during one of the most racially tense times in Boston's history, right after busing. And we spent a lot of our career just trying to build this Black newspaper that we founded. And it was really a struggle even on our own campus. And so that's always stuck with me, and it stuck with me throughout as I went through my career, just that experience.
Can you talk more about that? What was, I mean, I think, we can imagine what some of the racist pushback you might have gotten was, but what was some of the pushback? What were some of kind of the roadblocks that you were facing when you were trying to bring kind of a Black voice to the issues that were going on there?
Well, sometimes I think what happened is that there was the Daily Free Press, which was great daily campus paper. We did some work for it, but I think that becomes the gold standard. Sometimes when you have something that is established, and it might be predominantly white, and that's considered the gold standard. And so we're trying to do something new and different. And so, you have that feeling that people look at you as lesser. And that's always been something we have had to fight against in our profession, that the things that we create are lesser. You go do that, but it's not up to the standard. So part of it was that, sure, we had a small operation. We were looking to really tell Black stories on campus, the experiences of Black students, and it's for and by Black, by budding Black journalists. Of course, let's be honest, we don't know what we're doing. We're students, so we're learning the craft, right? So we're in a learning environment, but we still are having our experiences on this campus and in this environment. And so we wanted to give something to those students. And that was the impetus. And, there were things, we were very entrepreneurial. We had a conference of Black journalists. We brought some of the leading Black journalists to our campus. No one had ever done that. And initially, we didn't have a lot of support, to be honest with the university. We had to get that support. The president found out about it and was stunned, and he, pushed on some levers, and all of a sudden, President Silver, give him credit, and some doors open, we got some help. But a lot of it was we had to go our own, and you have to demonstrate that you can do it. And that was a great learning lesson as I went through our profession. You have to prove you can do things. And sometimes you have to do that on your own first.
You talked about how sometimes if you have a traditional paper or something like that, often it's white, and that kind of becomes the gold standard. And you've worked at those places too, a host of them. What was it like or what was your experience of how Black people were represented in those papers? And kind of what did you see as your responsibility as a reporter in those places?
Well, I also was a product of the summer program for minority journalists, which was at one point had trained half of the minority journalists in this country. It's hard to believe that as a stat, but it's what is now known as the Maynard Institute for Journalism Education, and the first program was a reporting program, and so I came into my first job, let's say the Milwaukee Journal, was an afternoon paper. I'm coming out of that experience, and I'm coming, as looking at the next generation of kind of activists and people that are pushing for, diversity and more Black journalists and other journalists to cover in newsrooms. So I felt it was an obligation. And so you're coming in, figuring out how can you bring yourself. I think it's one of the things that we've often struggled, that it come into newsrooms and to bring your own authentic self. As I've gone through, the ranks and along, I've always encouraged that for everybody, no matter who you are, to bring your full self to the table, because that's how these places get better. But there had been a time where we struggled, I think, certainly as Black journalists, to figure out how to balance that sense of who you want to be as a Black man or a Black woman with the other identities you may have. And we all have multiple identities. We're not one thing, and so I think it's been an evolution in our profession. We've gotten, it has been diversified more and more. We need more in the ranks of leadership. And to be honest, we need more capital Bs. We need more people to say, look, I'm gonna go out and do my own thing and create something. And it's a really important development.
Well, we love to hear that. And also you were a trailblazer there too. I wanted to talk a little bit about the Undefeated. You'd been at ESPN for some time and then decided to start and helm a publication that really looked at sports and culture through a lens and intersection of race. I'm wondering, like, what was the impetus behind that? And again, what were kind of the challenges, and what was the thing that made that challenge so exciting and worthwhile for you?
Well, look, some of it is going full circle. I'm remembering, carrying, the mock-ups to get printed across the Cambridge, Bridge in Boston when we were trying to start what was Black Folk, the student newspaper. And then I'm thinking, like, here, fast forward, 40 years later, or however many years it was at the time, and having the opportunity to start a digital, essentially a digital startup inside a major company like ESPN. The most difficult thing was leaving the Washington Post, to be honest, because I was managing editor. And so you're running a newsroom that is a really big newsroom after Jeff Bezos bought it and things are going great. And to leave that and essentially disrupt my own career in that way, to do something that was smaller and was going to be Black. And that was a really big challenge. And I'm glad that I did it because I learned so much. I thought part of what I was thinking was that I can come back and I can use the experience I have, what I've accumulated, and we can start something inside that's really cool and different and experimental and innovative inside this big company. And also I think about the development. We can develop Black journalists. Sometimes, it's often said, right, and we know wrongly, that we can't find people, to cover national security or to do this position or that. But we demonstrated, we could hire people, and we had no problem for every single position we needed. I could have staffed 2 or 3 undefeateds if I had budget. If someone said with all journalists of color, could have done it. And so part of it was just, giving people opportunity and developing journalists and taking chances on people and putting people together. And we were kind of in our own lab saying, what can we do here? What can we try? And it was really a great educational experience, but it was also a demonstration that, we could build something pretty much from scratch and be successful at it.
Yeah. A question that I've gotten asked before, and I'm sure you've heard a million times, is, why does having Black journalists as opposed to other journalists matter when it comes to coverage? Why does it matter what race they are versus just someone who's a good journalist? And I wonder how you answer that question for people.
Look, I mean, we were born Black. Many of us, we have a lot of different, I grew up in all Black communities. And, there's something about that. I know everybody's had different experiences. And so we all are different, right? But there is something that connects us, And when we did a series called Being a Black Man at the Washington Post, and one of the things in the early was we talked about, some of us were talking about, like, when you walk past Black people and that nod, I was down in Hawaii and Maui, when you see each other, there's a connection that even if we don't know each other, we probably have some shared experience somewhere in our background and a family. And that does inform your practice of this craft, right? And how you see what you see. And I think it's always, you can be Black in many different ways, but being Black is part of what you can bring to a story and to how a story is framed and shaped, and what stories you choose to tell. I think about, and this is just a really very personal experience. When we were doing the series Being a Black Man, and there were a series of narrative stories, and I did the one about an inmate. A formerly incarcerated person was out, had been in and out of prisons, and I would identify this person as a representation of the scary Black man, the one that you see in the nightly news too often, and the one where people clutch their purses when they see him or walk across the street. But everybody is a human being, right? And I don't know how many people would have been able to tell that story of it. I'm not saying only I could, but sometimes there is a connection where that there's a thin line between maybe me having that experience that he had out of prison and me and him. Sometimes it's a question of did somebody help you, what environment you were in. And so I spent a lot of time, and even though it was about an incarcerated person, that person's life needed to be seen too. And you often find, and I did in this case, that the population that are incarcerated are brilliant, right? There's so many brilliant people in it. This guy had written multiple kind of street literature. He was trying to change, turn his life around, and really uncertain how to do it because, society often does not give you that chance. You get incarcerated, man, you're in quicksand trying to dig out of that hole. And so it's important for us to tell stories so that we're all seen. And I don't care if you're the vice president of technology at the Walt Disney Company. I don't know how many people know this brother, right? The only VP, in technology, or if you're, Anthony Marcellus James and have beaten 3 murder charges and has been in and out of prison. We all need to be seen.
So now you are big boss at the LA Times. Well, so what made you jump from the Undefeated to the LA Times?
Something about the challenge. I think, as you get more and more experience in our profession, you're looking for ways to challenge yourself. At least that's how I see it. That's how we know we're alive, right? There's no point in, I didn't want to just coast and let me first say it was incredibly difficult to leave the Walt Disney because we finally had built the Undefeated to a place where it was going to be taking off, branching out across the Walt Disney Company to be the kind of global Black brand inside the Walt Disney Company that we always had envisioned it could be. And part of what made me able to leave, as difficult as it was, is that there were people that could take it. They didn't need me. Raina Kelly was managing editor. Go take it from here, and make it and keep going. We had a great staff and they were building it, and there's a music label up to happen and a book imprint, all these things that we had set up. You take it from there. And that's the way it should be. You create something and you can leave. But LA Times, it was just a challenge of it. It's probably, I would say California is maybe the most important state in the country. It's an innovative state. A lot of what happens in California will drive the rest of the country. And being anchored in LA is a vibrant, fresh city. And the LA Times has a lot of challenges. It's the largest newsroom west of the Potomac River. I think it's also that the West Coast needs a dominant, vibrant, electric multimedia company. And part of what I wanted to do is to take the experiences I had at the Undefeated and inside the Walt Disney Company and bring it to a traditional newspaper. Because I think now a newspaper is not what it was when I was reading it as a kid and also delivering it as a paper boy. We're all competing for people's time and their wallet. And I thought we could turn the LA Times into something really magical. And I wanted to challenge.
One of the things that we keep seeing, I'm sure you do too, is just the lack of trust that so many communities have in the news. And what gets really scary is that Black communities in particular struggling to trust news media. So I'm wondering how you think about that as you're helming a local but also national news outlet that's so important, that has such a diverse audience, but is obviously so critical for the communities that are served there in LA, including the Black community in LA. So how do you think about engendering that trust with that audience and making sure that they're reflective among the many narratives and many voices that you need to reflect?
Look, we always have work to do, right? Part of it is we have to do more than simply put our work out and say, here, you consume it. You know, sometimes when you're trying to build trust and gain respect and credibility, you need to do more than just simply produce your work. You know, you might need to, we might need to go sponsor block parties. You know, we may need you, we need to connect with communities when it's not just in our interest. You know, we need to do things, right, and be part of things. And so that's a big part of community engagement is a big part of it. You know, and as it relates to the Black community specifically, you know, really great idea by one of our writers is to have kind of a portrait initiative where we were going to go in Black communities and take portraits, you know, of people, and that's in some ways a civic responsibility, but it's also in some ways to showcase images and visual images of people who live in these communities. And so I think we have to do things that are beyond simply our journalism and extend our journalism. And so part of it is, and I'll say this, you know, representation matters. The more, you know, you bring more Black journalists in, that helps, you know, more voices and more people with different perspectives and can write and produce work and host podcasts and you do more of that, then you also extend your reach into Black communities.
Yeah. So I have one final question for you, which is, of course, going to be a big sweeping question that's unfair to ask you to answer in 30 seconds. But, you know, oftentimes on conversations like this, you get a lot of young journalists, you get a lot of aspiring journalists, but particularly for young journalists of color, you know, you've had so much experience in the industry, you have such an important job now, and there's so much upheaval in the industry, but I also feel like we're at such an important inflection point. We're having such big conversations about diversity and representation and the stories that we do and do not tell, all of the things that we talked about here. I'm wondering what advice you would give to young aspiring storytellers about what they should be focused on and how they should approach their work.
Yeah, it is a big sweeping question. But I do say that, look, be brave, right? I think courage is really hard. I think to lean on our ancestors and don't forget history, right? Sometimes we live in the moment, we see things with challenges, we're beaten down, we talk about the difficulty, and then you have to think about, man, what Thurgood Marshall did, you know, what Ida B. Wells did, you know, going in investigating lynchings, you know, Thurgood Marshall driving on back roads and people hiding him, you know, and going into courtrooms and winning, you know, going into the Supreme Court and you're 29-3, you know, and it takes a lot. So sometimes you have to also think, and you don't have to go back that far. You go back and just see that we're building something, right? And I encourage people, right? And, you know, I don't want to, you know, this is what you all are doing in Capital B, that's part of it. You know, we have to keep extending forward and building on foundation, you know. So what I say is people, they have ideas, come out with the ideas, right? If you're in a newsroom and you know, hey, you have an idea and you're entrepreneurial and you're sitting around talking about, well, the main news organizations don't have this, create your own, right? Might start small, or you're in a newsroom, you know, present a project. You know, our friend, you know, Nicole Hannah Jones, you know, 1619 project has been the source of so much debate and thing. It starts with her, one person in a big news organization. And that's what I think we need to have, you know, push forward the ideas, bring your passion and your talent, your intellect, and be brave about it and confident.
Well, Kevin, I could have this conversation with you all day, but I think we're going to leave it here for now. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Thank you, Jillian. Great to be with you.
Welcome, Capital B family, to day 2 of our launch event, The Power of Black Stories. Day 2's theme is bringing Black stories to the mainstream, and who better to have that conversation with us than none other than Tyler Perry, writer, director, producer, mogul, I think I'm forgetting something, billionaire. Yes, all of the above. Who better? Father, most importantly. And here we are. Tyler, thank you for joining Capital B. We really appreciate this.
It's my pleasure, Gavin, man. Thanks for having me.
Likewise. Well, talking about a Medea homecoming, right? We brought Medea out of retirement. As a young Black man, I connect with Medea because she is every older Black woman in my lifetime who has tried to guide me with either tough love, soft love, all of the above. That's who she is, right? But I think what's been the most interesting part about Medea is that she is a lens. She is a vehicle for you to tell other stories, talk about topics and issues that are pertinent to the Black community and Black folks, right? And so in watching a Medea homecoming, we have instances of that where, at the beginning, we have Cora, Mr. Brown, Joe, and Medea talking about the disruption to their lives because of protests dealing with Black Lives Matter and police brutality, right? And then halfway through and really throughout the film, we're looking at Tim's potential coming out story and Tim having to confront a Black family, which we know have historically been conservative on these issues. And then at the end, there's a soft, subtle moment I love where Medea and Tim are on the basketball court talking about gentrification, right? So these are issues that directly affect Black folks across the country. But for myself as the Atlanta editor, I'm particularly interested in how these affect Black folks. And I was wondering, when you're writing and you're in your creative process, being that you have such a connection to the city of Atlanta, how much of what's happening here manifests itself in your storytelling? How much of the city and the stories and the people influence the work you're creating?
I'm looking at the entire, that's why I brought Medea back to, just to have people to laugh. We need to laugh, man. From the pandemic, from what's been going on to politics, to what is happening with voter rights, just all of these things that are happening to just make us not be happy or joyous people. So I just wanted to bring a movie that was just silly, just laugh, right? But as I added all of these different things that were plaguing us, I wanted to make sure that I've addressed it, which Medea's always done over the years in the plays. So as I'm watching, take for instance the studio now that I've built here in Southwest Atlanta, and looking at so many people, the housing market of every house around here going through the roof, and being, working with organizations to make sure people can hold on to their houses and pay their taxes, especially the elderly. All of those things are really, really important to me, and because you don't want people coming in, buying the houses and pushing us out, and the whole neighborhood becomes something different. So addressing that, defund the police, and all of these different issues that we know are important, but we've got to find a way to have conversation about it. So that's what's been most important to me. How can I make us laugh, use it as an anesthetic, so that we can talk about the real things that are plaguing us?
Right. And to that end, that's something you mentioned 15 years ago when we spoke, which was, you said you think it's very important to show that there are other sides of who we are as people. And that's what Capital B is trying to do. We are using our talents as journalists, as news savvy folks, to try to bring more stories about Black folks that we don't see. On the news will always tell us about how we're criminals or we are, scourges of society, but we are here to really show the other side of that, show that Black folks, can really drive the whole country and the whole world forward given the chance. And so, I wonder, why does it still feel like that makes news, right? You're being able to launch at Tyler Perry Studios, us being able to launch this Black focused news outlet. Why is that still news? Why is it still kind of easier said than done?
Well, there's always going to be anything positive. It's just, for instance, like I posted something on my Instagram, and I was talking to one of my guys. I said, okay, posted, this is why I can't stand Kim Kardashian. All right, I post that on there. And I posted it on purpose because it was negative. I just want to see how many hits this negative title will get. And it got over, it was a joke about Medea saying she stole her costume for, the Met Gala, but it got over 1.5 million hits because of the negative title, right? But if you post something about love and positivity, it doesn't get as many hits. So that's just where we are in the world. So I think that people are ready to condemn, tear down, and tear you apart and cancel you, as opposed to lift you up, build you up, and encourage you. So that's why it's so important for what you're doing and what I'm doing, to let people know that whether you want to show it or say it or not, we're still there and we're still going to do the right things.
Right, right. And, in doing that, one thing that's always just stood out about you is you have a very firm grasp for your audience, right? You've been quoted as even saying that, like, if you don't like my writing, it's because you're not in my audience. And I think some folks might have seen that as like, oh, Tyler Perry's being petty. But I read that as like, this man, he understands who his audience is, right? You have no, confusion about who you're talking to. And so I would love to have you kind of explain to us, who do you see is your audience? And for us, especially a new news outlet trying to tell Black stories, what can you explain about, like, how do you ID your audience and speak to them? And then, as you've done, communicate and keep them in line and with you for over 20 plus years.
Well, I think it's just as simple as if you were in Mexico in front of an all Spanish speaking audience, you speak Spanish, right? And if you don't know how to speak Spanish, you get a translator. Well, over the years, I have learned a particular speak with my audience. Part of that is just being Black, being part of the culture, and also it's being from the South. It's also from my mother and aunts and all the things that they taught me. So I know who I'm talking to. Now, anybody else who comes along and watches it and may not get it or want to get it or may not understand it, they may not necessarily be the audience. But if they're open enough, they can find the way in, right? Like when I see a Nigerian movie, if I don't get it, I don't sit around complaining about it. I don't get it. I'm not from Nigeria. I don't understand some of the lingo and everything. So it's just very important. And I'll tell you this, and this is the thing that brought me here. Super serve your niche. Whatever the niche is, super serve it. Super serve it. Make sure they're cultivated, important, that you know that this is where you want to be. And I mean, uber focus on them and everybody else will come. And that's what I did.
Right. And it shows, right? Like your fan base, your audience, they ride for you, they fight for you. It's like, BTS has the army, Taylor Swift has the Swifties, Beyonce has the Beehive. Who is your audience in terms of, like, the people who are gravitating to it, the people who do love and follow every production, every stage production, every element of Tyler Perry? What is it about what you're doing, the stories you're telling, that draws them in?
And I think it's clearly the ability to be able to relate and understand these characters and understand the worlds, right? You look at Sisters and how well it's doing in the Oval, and Have Nots how well it did. It's about creating a world that I grew up with, that my mother would love to watch on television, that I would love to watch, and just saying things that people may not necessarily say, but they think. So, from the very beginning, my audience was African-American women. That's why I have, all these early plays. You look at some of the guys in the show and you hear all the screams in the audience. It clearly told me who was buying the tickets. And I had a clear understanding of, this is who I need to serve and pay attention to. This is who I need to talk to. And it just so happened that me trying to speak to my mother subconsciously in my first plays and movies, and defend her and all of those things, or wanting her to be happy, was what resonated with the millions of people who were coming to see what I was doing. So that's where it all started for me.
Right. And, as you're building out this audience, and over time, you have always had a hand in everything. Your first play, you were writing, directing, starring, but also working the concession stand. And so, you've always had a hand in things. But, if the goal and mission for what we're doing and what you're doing, right, is to bring as many different Black stories to the forefront in Black storytelling, do you feel like, in terms of bringing in more, say, Black writers into the writing room, folks still try to knock you for the fact that you've said you write everything, which, it doesn't seem like a super issue for me personally, but I'm curious, because if we're trying to tell as many different stories and add perspectives to the Black experience, would it not benefit you then to add more folks into the writing room?
Yeah, well, absolutely. And I have about 3 or 4 shows on the air right now who have writers now. So, and as I go, I'm relinquishing more and more and letting more and more people write. But you have to understand, in the beginning, the first time I had writers on House of Pain, my ratings dropped when they started writing, because people knew my voice, right? So I was very clear on, when I started a show like the Have and Have Nots or Sisters or Ruthless or whatever I'm writing, people know my voice. They know what, if they see Tyler Perry, they know it's my voice. They know what to expect, for good or for bad, but for the people who love it, it's what it is. So I don't think there's anybody in this business and probably you can add $15 billion companies on this list who's done more for Black people in in the business than I have, and I'm proud of that. And as I continue to grow that, I've also kept my eye on the focus of what I was supposed to be doing, how I was supposed to be doing it, and let everything else fall in place.
Right, and you just touched on that. You've literally built an ecosystem with Tyler Perry Studios, right? Like this is a place where there are multiple productions happening. Some of them are tied to you, some aren't, but it's a space where you are trying to not only give Black folks and just Black storytellers a place to do that, but like you're also trying to spur growth in a community. You're in a predominantly Black area. You are in Atlanta. Like, why is that part so important to you? Why not only, of course, the tax breaks here, but what about setting up shop in Atlanta is so crucial and so important to what you're doing?
Well, even before the tax credit, I had my own first little studio here because it was never about that. It was just when I got here, this is the first place I ever saw Black people do well. I came from New Orleans. There weren't many successful doctors and lawyers, and I didn't see that there. I got here one weekend for Freaknik and thought, oh man, I'm moving because this is the promised land for me to see so many people do well. So that's why I ended up here, and that's why I've stayed all these years.
Mm-hmm. What do you feel about like going back though, when you came here from New Orleans, you were trying to get that first play off the ground. Everybody knows the story of you raising $12,000 to get things going and working out of your car when you had to because all the money was invested in this project. What drew you to Atlanta? What was it about it? What made you want to come here in the first place?
Well, Freaknik, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
I was coming with a bunch of buddies to party, and I got here, and while everybody else is at the club and drinking and all this other stuff, I'm probably 19 or 20 years old. I'm looking around going, whoa, wait a minute, Black people live there? Wait, Black people? Wait, they're going to the movies? Wait, wait, this restaurant's full of Black people. I didn't see that in New Orleans unless we were serving, right? So, and this wasn't the 40s or 50s. This was, the 90s. So to come here and feel the pulse and the energy of a place where Black people were welcome, and not only welcome to thrive, but they were also running the city, all those things were important to me.
Yeah, and to that end, not only on the film aspect, right? At Tyler Perry Studios, you've wanted to create a space where, victims of abuse, members of the LGBTQ plus community who are, suffering from different systemic oppressions around the country, giving them a space in Atlanta. Why is that also important? Taking not only what you're doing as a storyteller, a filmmaker, a businessman, but also just like creating now a space for just human beings. Why is that such a big deal?
Well, first of all, my mother, I often wonder, as abusive as my father would, what would she have had done had she had options, right? So to build a shelter for trafficked children, for LGBTQ kids who are, put out, and I do a lot of work with Covenant House, and some of the stories will break your heart on these kids who are out on the street because, they came out to their families or the families find out, and the things that they did to them. It's heartbreaking on so many levels. So anywhere that I could be of service to be able to help people who are disenfranchised or who are going through some stuff because of the position that I've been put in, I feel like I owe it. So that's what's important to me.
Right. And, to that end, I think it was Whoopi Goldberg who made a visit to the studios when you launched, and she was saying that, it's wonderful, it's beautiful, but that she doesn't really feel as though folks really understand, the influence you've had. And why do you think even 20 years in, $1 billion later, countless productions, countless opportunities provided, folks still seem to have a sense of trying to wrap their head around who Tyler Perry is? Why are folks still trying to get at who you are and whether or not that influence is as influential as some folks say?
The short answer is because I'm Black. I feel like if I were a white man who had done this, it would be a much different story. I was talking to somebody who recently, pretty powerful person, and he didn't know who I was, and was saying that I need to do more to become more popular. Right? I was just thinking, and I'm like, okay, but with all of that said, I understand that the world that we live in, I'm not a person who sat around, talking about Oscar so white and I'm going to fight this and I'm going to fight that. That's not me. I thought, okay, here's the hand I'm dealt with. Here's the hand I have. Let me find a way to make this the best that I can. And I don't complain about it. It is what it is. But I know if any man or woman who wasn't Black had done all of this, then it would be a much different story.
Right. And I think, as Black folks, I think we also talk a lot about, your stories and what they mean for the community, right? And I think another famous Atlantan Tide storyteller who was Black, obviously Spike Lee, you guys famously clashed, then talked and had a dialogue, which is great because that's something you talk a lot about a lot. It's like, we need to talk to each other, whether we agree or disagree, let's have conversations. And, it's interesting to me because I feel like as a fellow Black storyteller, we hold ourselves to such high regard and such high standards that we're always calling each other out, or being like, even in Atlanta, like other journalists will reach out to me like, did you see what so-and-so wrote? Did you see what they did? That's not how I would have done that story. And so I'm curious, kind of twofold, what was like the gist of that conversation? And why do you feel like as Black storytellers, we're always keeping tabs on each other to the point where we feel like we need to finally have come to Jesus talks and really discuss how we can work together?
Listen, some of that can be healthy. If it's criticism, like I have people who criticize me, who I call up and say, "What did you think of that?" And they go, "Nah, you should do this, you should." And I'm completely fine with the healthy criticism. But if there's vitriol, if there's venom, or if there's jealousy, then what's the point of that? I don't address it. I don't talk about it. I don't talk to the person. In the Spike case, I've always been a huge fan of what he had done, right? So once we had a conversation about Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurston and how they had this beef because Langston Hughes being this sophisticated man from New York, Harlem Renaissance, looking at her, calling her the new version of the darky because she spoke from a Southern point of view and her characters had a Southern dialect, right? That neither, and no matter what story she told, she had the right to, because of it's her experience, and it's the same with me. And if there's a journalist who's saying this or saying that, or somebody's writing this or writing that, if that's the experience that they want to have, then great. You can challenge them on it, but in that challenge, why can't you be respectful? Why can't you not tear them down? Why can't you let me say, here is how I feel about this, and this is out of pure love and wanting the best for you. So that's how I approach things in life. And when you live like I have, and you've had this amount of success that I've had, what's the point of being aggravated, jealous, or angry at someone?
Right. I mean, I respect that and I appreciate that because, like, again, we've been talking about this. Like, once you ID your audience, you know what works for you, and at the heart of your mission is still bringing those Black stories to the forefront. Honestly, that's what matters, what should come first. And to kind of close this out here, and the thing you've mentioned is fatherhood. I think a big part of who you are now is that, and making sure that you help guide Amon through life, through understanding the world we live in. And you've talked about having to have conversations about race and some of these heavier topics sooner than you would like to because of the climate we're in, right? But I'm curious to know, like, how does Amon see Dad's work, and his storytelling, and if he one day came to you and was like, "Dad, I like what you're doing. How do I do that? What would that talk go like?"
He still doesn't know like what I do, right? He has an idea. Like, we had a conversation about what is famous recently. He's 7 years old. I said, "Do you know what famous is?" He said, "Yeah. That's when lots of people know you and you're really popular." I was like, "Yeah." I was like, "You know I'm famous? Like, a lot of people know me. I'm really popular according to that definition." He goes, "What?" I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Lots of people know you?" Like, "Yeah." "Why?" "Well, I do movies and things like that." "Oh, like Paw Patrol." He saw the Paw Patrol movie. And like, yeah, like Ninja, he saw the Ninja Turtles. He said, "Oh, okay." He said, "I can see that. I can see that." But if he were to come to me and tell me that he wanted to be in this business, he's going to have a hard road to hoe, because he would start at the bottom. He would start as a PA and he'd have to work his way through, just like I did. Just because I'm your dad doesn't mean that you're going to get a pass. I want you to know everything about this job if you're going to sit in this seat, so that whoever you talk to, you know what they do. So if he wants to do that, that would be my greatest honor to pass this on to him. But if he doesn't, I understand that too. But we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah. Okay. And just lastly for yourself, right? When we're talking about the power of Black storytelling and bringing Black stories to the masses, for the next young Black filmmaker, Black storyteller, who sees your story and really gravitates to the kind of, I did it my way and I did it for people who look like me, what would you tell them? What are some things that they need to know, things that maybe you wish you knew then that you know now that you can impart onto them based off of the experience?
I actually have no regrets, because I set a goal, I set an intention, and the goal was to be somewhere around where I am now. And no matter what happened, I only served that purpose. Like, whatever decision I made was about that purpose. So what I would tell them to do is set a goal and don't do anything that doesn't serve you getting to that goal. And that has served me well. So I would hope that they would learn more about ownership and holding on to their ancillary properties and making sure that they own the copyright so that they can become more independent, so they can stop all these hashtags about this is so white, they won't let us in, this is that, this is that. Because the more ownership you have, the more the world will change, for sure.
Very well said. Well, Tyler Perry, thank you so much for joining Capital B and talking to me. I hope it wasn't too painful.
It was good, Gavin. I appreciate it, man. Congratulations on all this.
Oh, awesome. Likewise. And, hopefully we will run into each other sooner than later.
Yep, absolutely, brother. Okay.
Thank you, my brother.
All right, take care.
Take it easy.
Bye.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Akoto Oforiatta, co-founder and chief audience officer of Capital B. I'm joined today by Errin Haines, editor-at-large and founding mother of The 19th, a news organization covering gender, politics, and policy. Hi, Errin.
Akoto, hi, happy launch, congratulations.
Thank you so much. It is so good to see you. And I'm so excited for our conversation today about choosing your own path to tell stories you want to tell in journalism. You and I have something in common. We both left our roles at established newsrooms to do something different, something urgent. As I mentioned, you are a founding mother, a term that I love so much, of The 19th. And before that, you were covering race at the AP and had been a journalist in what I believe is mostly traditional newsrooms for most of your career. Yeah. So let's start off with you just talking a bit about what made you want to take the leap.
Yeah. Well, no, we're going to start off with shouting out to you, history maker. I am just really so proud of what you all are building. I spent most of my career in mainstream legacy media, but I actually got my start in the Black press. And so to see you all taking that mission into the 21st century, it really is so exciting for what is possible. And honestly, for many of the same reasons that the Black press, had to start in the first place. So kudos to all of you. And I'm so looking forward to that work. But yeah, I mean.
Thank you so much. I mean, this could turn into a fangirl conversation because Errin, as you know, you were one of the first people we tapped when we decided we were going to do this, and you've been in our corner from the beginning. So shout out right back to you.
The feeling is absolutely mutual. So yeah, so I did start my career, after I left the Atlanta Daily World, which is in my hometown of Atlanta. Started my career in legacy mainstream newspapers, worked at the Los Angeles Times, the Orlando Sentinel, and then spent the bulk of my career at the Associated Press, where I rose through the ranks and eventually became national writer covering the intersection of race and culture and politics and all kinds of things in this country. And around the time that I was first approached about the 19th, I was covering the Democratic presidential primary. So you had a record 6 women running for president. You have the most diverse slate of Democratic candidates to ever run. And yet, the narratives around that primary and around our election cycle, given everything that we had seen in 2016, given everything we'd seen in 2008, right? I mean, and since then, just really felt way too familiar in a lot of the wrong ways, right? And that really what I realized was because we had a chance to make a different choice, and that is not just, limited to where I was working. I feel like throughout our industry, throughout political journalism, while I certainly had more company on the campaign trail in terms of women, people of color, other Black journalists, what was still true was that that genre of journalism was still way too white and way too male. And so you still are going to have obviously the same kind of narratives being perpetuated because you don't have different people telling the story and making decisions about which stories are going to be told. And so when my now boss, our CEO, Emily Ramshaw, slid into my DMs and was like, hey, I'm starting this newsroom, I was just like, you know what? That actually, I cannot believe that has not happened already, number one, right? But number two, this feels overdue and yet very urgent at the same time. And so when I took the leap with Emily and my other founding mothers in January of 2020, honestly, the risk was not in starting this new thing. For us, the risk really felt like not starting and not trying to do something different, because we felt like the fastest and best way to really change so much of what we saw was wrong with political journalism was really just to start over and to try to build the coverage and the culture that frankly a lot of us wish that we had earlier in our careers, and that we wanted to exist for the journalists that ended up joining us in this endeavor.
Yeah, I actually that all really resonates with me, and I want to get a little personal and go a little deeper to the exact moment. Because I think it is important, in my own sort of co-founder journey, it is important to demystify, especially for Black journalists, the decision-making process that comes with making this kind of decision. They're not easy decisions to make. There's a lot to be nervous and fearful about. You just reminded me that you guys had launched just before the pandemic.
3 months
not
before.
Something,
yeah. Didn't see that coming.
Did not something you could have predicted. So take us to the exact moment when you chose to make the jump. You mentioned the Democratic primaries. There was also so much else going on in the country. What were you weighing? What were you balancing? And when did you ultimately, what pushed you over the edge?
Because I was already on the primary campaign trail and was having to kind of strike down these notions of electability, right? Because electability is about who is electable. I had just come off of covering the 2018 Georgia gubernatorial race, right? Where Stacey Abrams came within striking distance of making history. And so thinking a lot about, my home state of Georgia, potentially electing the first Black woman ever to be governor of any state in the country, right? And what it was gonna take to really get us there, and what the conversations with the journalism was going to have to look like for us to really start to stretch our political imaginations as a democracy and as a society. So I guess that seed was maybe already kind of planted for me, and I was thinking about some of these things because I will tell you, I thought a lot, because I'd been somebody who'd focused on race for the bulk of my career. I thought a lot about what it meant to be a Black person in this country, and having that lens when I and applying that lens to a lot of my work. But it really was not until I got to the 19th, and maybe on a subconscious level before that I was, but very recently is what I'm trying to say, that I started thinking about what it meant to be a woman in this country, and how that really impacted the stories that I was choosing to tell and that I was telling, and the voices that I was bringing into those stories, who was being unseen and unheard in this democracy, really thinking about that. The gender piece came for me much later. But as I think about that, it's still intersectional, right? I can't think about being a woman without thinking about being a Black woman. I think about the intersection of gender and race a lot more thoughtfully, I think, now being at the 19th, but I was thinking about it on that primary campaign trail. And so I think headed into the fall, probably, because I agreed to come on board just a couple of months before we launched, which was a very nervous time, as I'm sure you probably can relate to. But I was covering the debates, and just kind of seeing the kinds of stories that I was writing, and knowing that I absolutely could write those stories at the Associated Press and do those as the national writer on race who had, all the authority and expertise that kind of role comes with. But it was really, I felt like what I was doing and what I was saying about the idea that race and gender should be the story of the 2020 election. That was something I felt that we should be saying as a politics team. That was what I felt like we were saying as a political journalism class, right? That wasn't going to happen. It was going to be fine for some people to tell that story alongside whatever the main story that other gatekeepers decided was going to be the main story of the election, right? But I knew that if we were able to start this, and if it could be successful, what we would be able to assert on the day after the election, that women were the deciders of this election, that Black women were the backbone of this democracy, as the main story, not the side dish, that was the thing that really got me excited and really made me say, you know what, I want to go and do this, because I don't see a legacy mainstream outlet that is going to let me do that right now.
That is really, really powerful. you know, I was in a position where I could have stayed in the newsroom that I was working in to make it better, you know, make it more equitable, which I think you and I both agree is absolutely important work.
And necessary work, absolutely.
Yes. Our mainstream news organizations still need to do that, and we support them in those efforts. But you know, I had this energy in me that I couldn't, you know, put away, something that was pulling me to do something outside the box, outside the status quo, and on behalf of Black Americans specifically. And you know, there are so many ways to describe all the things that I was feeling and needing in June 2020, which is the time we decided to make the decision. I don't need to tell everyone what was happening in June 2020. But when I really boil it down, I think what I wanted was more freedom to trust myself and to trust my gut about the kinds of stories that we needed, just like you were saying about what the political class needs to focus on, and to be in a place where other people who look like me could do the same. And yeah, I'm imagining that also resonates with you, just the freedom.
You know, everything that you're saying is absolutely resonating with me. And also just knowing, I mean, look, you looked up in 2020, were probably frustrated with some of the narratives that you were seeing out there, you know, in terms of how our racial reckoning moment was being covered in this country, just knowing everything that we have known about the past several years in terms of the intersection of race and our democracy and our society, and saying, you know, wait a minute, I'm the one that I've been waiting for, like, why not me, right? Like, and also like, yes, you could continue to stay where you are. Look, I was in my dream job already when I was at the AP. I had wanted to be national writer on race in America from the time I was an intern at the AP. So when I finally got there, I was doing,
you have arrived, right?
Personally fulfilling, right? But yes, the mission and the calling that you felt to do something for the culture, to really represent and bring your entire lived experience to this work, that is the thing that feels different now. Obviously, you are somebody who also has the journalistic credibility and capital to, you know, say, you know what, I'm going to try this. If it doesn't work, okay, fine. I'm perfectly employable. I will go back and do something else. But what if it does work? What if we do try this and we can do it? Like, what will that mean for my people? What will that mean for this industry, right? What is the effect of a capital B on the rest of this industry that needs to be covering and needs to see that these stories are out there? It's not just about what you all will do on that site. It is about the capital B effect that I absolutely am predicting is going to happen throughout this industry. And I look forward to seeing that happen. And for me to say, you know what? Yes, I think that this is what pushed that to happen.
Yeah, I am excited for all of that too. So thank you.
Get ready.
So you're at the 19th, I'm at Capital B. We launched a few weeks ago. So you've been at this much longer than we have.
Right, I'm like the grizzled veteran up here right now. We're all
right, you're 2 years in. So you know, I obviously follow your work a ton, and I find it particularly rangy. You do pieces about Black women in political office and how that's shaping our political landscape. You've written about Black women victims of police shootings. You've written about pay equity across different industries. And I'd love for you to tell me, like, how do you describe the beat that you've carved out for yourself at the 19th?
Yeah, so my official title is editor at large, which is, you know, whatever it needs to be on any given day. But it often is a lot of different things. But yeah, I mean, you know, I think really constantly thinking about, so if anybody has seen our logo, if you're familiar with the 19th, we are named for the 19th Amendment, obviously, which gave some women, not all women, the right to vote in 1920, but there's an asterisk in our logo, and that asterisk is in recognition of the omission of the Black women who fought shoulder to shoulder with those white suffragists and yet did not get their full access to the franchise until the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And so the asterisk is a reminder of those women, but it is also a reminder of the people that remain unseen and unheard in our democracy. So I'm taking the roundabout way to say, honestly, like, I feel like my beat is, I just try to live in the asterisk. I'm always thinking about who is unseen and unheard and whose voices need to be brought into the conversation, right? Who are we talking about when we're talking about rural voters, when we're talking about educated voters, when we're talking about, you know, voters who care about the Supreme Court, when we're talking about faith voters, right? When we're talking about parents, right, in this CRT debate. So like bringing all of those different types of voices and perspectives. When we're talking, when we want an academic or we want an expert, why isn't that person a Black woman? Sure. Why aren't we quoting somebody from an HBCU every single time that we want to quote somebody from a college to speak on anything with authority, right? Like, these are choices that we can make. These are ways of kind of expanding and normalizing people who have been othered in our society for far too long. And so honestly, like, I feel like so much of my work is really just platforming those things, regardless of what the topic is.
Yeah, I love that, living in the asterisk. And I actually wanted to talk a bit about the asterisk because I think it's such an important nod to the brand and to the work you do with the 19th. I believe last year, Brent Staples wrote about, white newspapers' historical role in fueling racist violence, perpetuating white supremacy, erasing Black stories, and how in recent years, so many newsrooms have had to atone for their past behavior, right? But it is really nice to work at a place that has a chance to get it right from the beginning. That baked into its existence is the idea that journalism has failed so many of us for so long, and we're going to start on day one trying to get that right. And so as you sort of charted this path, I'd love to hear, what it's like to be in a newsroom that is fueled with that mission, not just for your work, but I'm sure it's just the thing that sort of drives of all of the work that you and your colleagues do.
Yeah, well, two things. One, you brought up a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and I have to plug something else that I'm doing that is kind of, it speaks directly to kind of the editor at large thing. I mean, I kind of see things out in the journalistic ecosystem and I want to weigh in on them, right? So literally, you bring up the role of newspapers in perpetuating inequality, right? So last week, the project that I'm working on for the Philadelphia Inquirer, shout out to local journalism, launched chapter 1 of that series. It's called A More Perfect Union. It's at the Inquirer, and it launched. Wesley Lowery wrote the first chapter, and it is literally an interrogation of the Inquirer's role in perpetuating inequality in the city of Philadelphia over its 190-year plus history, right? So
an incredible project, by the way.
Thank you so much. Looking back at that history, but also looking at what the way forward is. Because like you said, I mean, we've still got colleagues in the trenches, right? And that work absolutely has to continue, even if that's not going to be our work anymore. Like that is the work of our colleagues, but also of their other counterparts who are not Black. That is their work collectively to try to figure out the way forward so that the systemic institutional inequality can begin to be dismantled. Because journalism is certainly not an institution that was immune from the reckoning, and that reckoning is ongoing. Just in case you got some folks out there who are tired and they're just like, oh, we already reckoned, we done enough, like we got to keep going. Yes,
you have not.
We're only the beginning of the reckoning. So
right.
Anyway, but no, I mean, I think that there is absolutely something very exciting about the idea of building culture instead of fixing it, which is what our work is. It's hard work, but it's very different work, right? Like, we are building this plane as we are flying it, right? But we are also not throwing the engine out the back and like whatever else is not working. Like, no, that stuff, that baggage that exists, frankly, at a lot of legacy mainstream places, that makes it very hard to turn those cultures and those institutions around. We are not burdened by that, right? We are bringing certainly our strong journalism foundations, the best of what we love about journalism. We bring that to this work while we then try to build on that to make these newsrooms, the newsrooms of the future, the newsrooms that we are envisioning, more equitable. Equity was at the core of the 19th, which I think was so important for us because, like you said, we launched in January 2020, right? So 5 months ahead of the reckoning, we launched, but even a year before that, we were already thinking, if we're going to start this, we may not even know how to fully get there, but like, equity is absolutely going to be at the center of what we are doing here, because we know that is absolutely the center of what's missing in mainstream legacy media.
I love the airplane metaphor. That was awesome. Baggage, the air, the engines. It's so true.
We're not dumping stuff out the back while we're trying to build it.
Right, exactly. So true. It's so true. Errin, how has this choice, this decision to leave what you call the dream job at the AP, how has it enriched you and made you a better journalist?
Yeah. This is my new dream job, Akoto. I mean, honestly, truly, it is the best decision I've ever made in my career. And I had a pretty good career before I got here, but it's just what you were saying. this is the freest that I've ever been as a journalist. And it is because, again, I'm able to bring everything, all of my identities to bear on this work. And that is something that has been seen from day one as an asset and not a liability to my journalism. How many of us as Black journalists have been told to leave our bias at the door as if objectivity was not, a white construct, a white male construct in our industry, so being somewhere where, that is valued as a strength to my journalism has made me stronger as a journalist, has made my voice stronger. And it really, this decision is the thing that has made everything else that anybody sees happening to me, for me, whatever, it's made all of that possible.
That's beautiful. I think that there is a real groundswell. I mean, Black journalists like you, like me, are joining and building newsrooms where they have, the best shot at meeting the moment with the critical work that's needed right now.
Yes.
And obviously, Nicole Hannah-Jones big flexed on all of us when she decided to turn down the UNC job to go to Howard to build an investigative journalism school. And she put out a bit of a call to remind people that they can do the same. They can build their own, carve their own path. And so let's end with the advice you would give to other Black journalists about creating their own paths and to do the kind of work that they want to do.
Don't wait, start, because that's what somebody told me. Start. If you are thinking about this, we are in a moment where your lived experience must be valued on the other side of everything that we have seen. Like Black journalists, Black people in this country are not going back to the status quo. Black women definitely are not going back to the status quo. And so, when we are thinking about what, yes, this is a time to really be asking the big questions, to have the big ideas, and to go for it. Because why not? Why not you? Why not your idea? If you're looking at this conversation right now, you're seeing things happen out in the industry, and you're like, maybe I could do. Yes, you too. Come on, come and do this work. Like it is. Yes, it is scary. Yes, it is. It feels daunting on a lot of days, but man, is it rewarding. It is worth everything.
Totally. Why not you? Why not now? Could not agree more. Errin, as you know, I love talking to you all the time. So thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. It is so special to be a part of you all's launch. And I just know that this is the beginning of just many, many more great things to come. So congratulations on making history, my friend.
Oh, thank you so much. Ditto.
Hello, everyone. I am Lauren Williams, CEO and co-founder of Capital B, and I'm here in conversation with Tia Williams, the best-selling author of 7 Days in June. Tia is an amazing author, a pioneering beauty blogger, a former beauty journalist, and I should just address the elephant in the room, or I don't know, the elephant in the Zoom. Tia and I go way back. She is actually my sister. And so she and I are going to be having a pretty loose conversation today about telling Black stories and why she and I have both been driven to do this in our careers. So welcome, Tia.
Thank you, Lauren. This is such an honor. I am your biggest, most passionate fan, as you can tell from my stories every time you get a fabulous press hit.
Well, I am your biggest fan as well. You are the person who inspired me to become a journalist. I followed in your footsteps. And so I'm really excited to talk today about what inspired you and what continues to inspire you. And so I'm going to put you on the spot first, because I want you to kind of talk about what drove you from the beginning to want to tell stories and reach Black people and Black audiences, because you have wanted to do it from two angles, both as a beauty journalist and as a novelist. And, you know, why did that start, and what drove you?
Well, I felt like, I mean, as you experience, like when we were growing up in the 80s and 90s, like the media that we consumed was mainstream media, which was just white, more or less. And I was obsessed with reading and fiction, and the books I mainly read were like, you know, mom's romance novels, and then also like the big Jackie Collins, Judith Krantz, glitzy, saucy sort of love stories. They used to call it glamour fiction. I don't know what they call it anymore, but there were never any Black characters in any of these books. And then my other big interest was fashion magazines. I was obsessed with them, like from a tiny age. And there was no Black people in there either. Like, you know, if you were a Black kid that was interested in makeup, like you really had to be a scientist and get a bunch of stuff from the drugstore and figure it out yourself. And so I always had it in my mind, like I was always translating what I was consuming, but, you know, from a Black perspective. So I would read, you know, a Jackie Collins novel, but recast all of the characters as Black people in my head. And then when I'm reading fashion magazines and I'm taking in like the beauty tips, and I'm like, okay, that works for a blue-eyed blonde. How is that going to work for me? And, you know, kind of trying to figure that out on my own. And it's lame and it's stupid. And, you know, like I look around and there was Black people living like full, amazing lives, and we just weren't anywhere. So I wanted to grow up, and I always knew that I wanted to do this, which I know is a rare thing, but I had two big goals: that I was going to work in fashion magazines and kind of change things from the inside, because Black beauty editors in the 90s were not a thing. And then I also wanted to write fiction for us, write the books that I wanted to read for me. So yeah, I guess that's where it all comes from, the lack.
Mm-hmm. And 7 Days in June came out last year. It was and is an enormous hit. You were an instant New York Times and USA Today bestseller. You were a Reese Witherspoon book club pick. This comes after you had been writing books forever. And with real success, but with also the struggle of getting quality Black stories out there. So it was a real triumph, but also, you know, how did it feel to finally get there?
Oh, it felt really good. But then it also was extremely bittersweet, because I published my first novel in 2004, and I wrote it when I was a couple years before, when I was 25. And it's taken this long for, you know, for this to happen. Like you said, I'd always been a success, but like a people who know kind of a thing. Like it wasn't any sort of like mainstream. And it was really, it was a small, passionate following that I've always had. And it's been such an uphill battle, because, you know, the book publishing industry is overwhelmingly white, and definitely was in the 90s and the aughts. Things are getting a little better now because they've been called out. But, you know, back then it was like, if it's not about Black suffering, and if characters aren't seen through the lens of some sort of like oppression porn, or, you know, having to get over, you know, the trauma of Blackness to find happiness, it's like they didn't understand us in any other context. So when I come in and I want to write like fun, saucy novels about like, a young Black beauty editor or a Black woman working in fashion, and, some of the feedback I would get was actually like, are there even any Black fashion editors? Like, is this even realistic? One of my novels, like, I will never forget this feedback. It was like, this is really fun and cute, but can't you work in, okay, she's a fashion editor. Like, let's hear some more about how hard it is to be a Black woman in the overwhelmingly white fashion industry. It's like, we get it, but we would really get it if you made her suffer because she's Black. Like, we can't just exist in, a great story for the sake of existing in a great story like everyone else. So yeah, it's definitely been an uphill climb. The novel that I published in 2016 was rejected by every publisher.
Perfect Find.
Yeah, it was The Perfect Find. And it was one of the scariest, darkest experiences in my life. Because like, I knew in my heart it was good, but like, it was rejected everywhere. And there was no, it wasn't like, oh, your writing isn't good or you need to work on this. It was always something about like it not being relatable. And the question is like, relatable to who, to what audiences? And when the gatekeepers are white, and even like mostly white men publishing used to be, it's like, no, they're not going to get it. So yeah, it was amazing that 5 years later, I had this success, but it was hard won.
And now The Perfect Find is has been made into a movie starring Gabrielle Union.
Yes, at Netflix. Which I cannot believe. I saw the Getty images of, behind the scenes, like some more came out recently, and it just looks so good. They have so much chemistry.
Yeah, I mean, and I think, this is a Hollywood story too that you always hear about, this idea that Black stories can't possibly be, marketable or mainstream, and only Black people could like them. When we've spent our whole lives consuming things that don't center us, that aren't about us, that aren't for us, and managing to find meaning in them and enjoy them. But other groups couldn't possibly, enjoy our stories.
Right, which is so insane. Like, to be a Black person who is around our age is to have to subtract themselves from the media we're consuming, or else like we just wouldn't consume any media.
Right.
Like, yeah. But that's also why what you're doing is so revolutionary. Centering the Black news, written by Black people, conceived by Black people, for a Black audience, spotlighting Black issues. And what I want to hear you talk about is what was, as an esteemed journalist, like just looking around and taking in the news the past couple of years, like what was the big story that you felt really missed the Black piece of it, whether it was the audience that the story didn't speak to, whether it was they were missing out on, the Blackness in the telling of the story? Like, what was the big news event that happened where you were like, okay, no, I need to do this myself?
I mean, for me, and Akoto, Capital B's co-founder, the catalyst was really the murder of George Floyd and the protests and the conversation around police reform that ensued over the rest of 2020. And it wasn't, and that's maybe strange to say because of how much focus was on that story, and because that was a moment of real awakening for a lot of people, about, including a lot of newsrooms, about covering issues of race. But at the same time, it was so through a white lens. Like, that story in the mainstream became less and less about the Black people who were historically the victims of a racist criminal justice system, and more about the discovery that white people were going through in the moment. And granted, it was really important that white people went through that discovery, but that's not what this was ultimately about. And that just got lost in the mainstream. And it really frustrated me to see it. And it was just one of many examples of the disconnect between story and audience in the media, where there's lots of resources in mainstream media put toward telling impactful stories and presenting them beautifully and writing them beautifully, but not enough put into connecting that information to the communities that are most impacted by the issues present in the story. It's all about informing, majority white people about some stuff they didn't know about already. And wide swaths of Black people across the country, aren't being reached with this information that's in a way that centers them and centers their needs. And that audience point just like eats away at me, and it ate away at me in Akoto. And you could say the same thing about the situation we're in with COVID, and really any other systemic issue that just disproportionately affects us. And that's really what drives us. The legacy Black press, the reason why it came to be was about the importance of this information exchange. Like they're not telling the truth. They're not giving you what you need over here. And we are going to do that to fill that hole. The needs aren't exactly the same, obviously, as they were in 1827, but unfortunately, there are still needs. And, a lot of those newspapers that were born in that era still exist, but there aren't enough of them. And, we thought that there was a hole to be filled.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's it's an incredible tradition, which is like, woven into the fabric of American history. Like those newspapers were founded to be like, okay, here's how you get to freedom. Or like when you get up north, this is how you behave, so that it was news for us that was not even really any of white people's business. and that is valid. I really felt it with the critical race theory situation earlier this year or last year, when all
about white parents.
Yeah. Like no one asked.
And it's, white parents on either side of the issue, but it's all about white parents and thinking about white teachers. Like, how are Black teachers feeling about this? Just forgetting that Black people just live in this country, that Black people are parents and Black people are teachers and Black people are school board members and Black people are principals and Black people are superintendents, and they are dealing with all of this stuff, and it's outrageous. And that's just not a thing that we're, as a country, paying the right attention to. And that's what we're going to be doing at Capital B.
Yay! And I think that's both of our, personal manifestos. Everything I write is for us. It's for Black women specifically. And I always say, like, whoever loves it outside of us, I'm so excited for that. But I'm not writing with any other audience in mind. It is a gift for us specifically. And, we need it in the news. We really need it in the news. And yes, white people need to be taught things. Why are you laughing? Are you laughing at me? I'm going off.
No, it's good. Keep going.
It's a tangent, but no, because it's like we do need to have space to, yeah, okay, so you need to read White Fragility or was White Fragility, and you need to, rethink some things. But we don't need to rethink those things. I don't need to attend another diversity seminar.
Yeah,
You know?
that's really just not the story here.
Right.
And what it's done is basically shifted the story to like, are these diversity seminars even good? And now we're not even talking about police reform anymore. We're talking about, is White Fragility a good book to, and it's just,
yes,
it just deflects from the real issues. So, I mean, that was a huge, that was a real that was our big moment where we said, this what was supposed to be this moment of this eye-opening moment for the country has just, completely gone off the rails instantly. And there's so much more that can be done by people who are not, by journalists who just won't take their focus on the important thing. I have a question for you. So you mentioned it at the beginning when you were talking about the thing that you'd always dreamed of when you were, you wanted to go into fashion magazines, change things from the inside. You were doing this in the late 90s, early 2000s. And if this was today, and we know that the young people of today are so much more empowered about their own boundaries and how to work and than we were back then, do you think that you would have made that same choice? Or do you think that you would have sought out a different kind of space than wanting to be a pioneer in what was surely like some difficult newsrooms?
Yeah.
Do you think you would have been like, no, I'm going to go to Essence?
Yeah, I do, because that comes from, we don't have anything. So let me go to the capital E establishment. Like that means true success. Like if you can break into these doors where most white people can't even get into, and you can get in there, then you've really made it. And there was some of that in there. In 1998, who wouldn't want to work at Elle? If you're obsessed with fashion, like, hell yes, this is before blogs, this is before the internet, this is before social media. The only place you're going to get your beauty and fashion news outside of House of Style on MTV or Elsa Clench on VH1 was magazines. This was it. And there's 4 or 5 top magazines, and they're all white. Me as a Black woman coming to New York at 22, that's where I wanted to be. The idea of even like starting your own thing, starting a vlog or a blog or something like that, like that was years out. So I didn't have the options that, young writers do today. I don't even know that I had the self-awareness at that time. Like, white respectability was respectability. And that means you were really taken seriously. And I also knew that as someone who was raised in white schools, had been around white people my entire life and knew how to code switch and knew how to, knew them better than they know themselves, the way all of us who have grown up being the onlys in the room kind of know it's a shorthand. I knew that I was the one who could get in there and, you know, covertly wheel and deal and get some changes made. And so, yeah, but if I was coming out of school now, there's no need. What would I need them for? I could start my own thing on, you know, I could become a TikTok, you know, beauty influencer.
Yeah, and you would, and the second some of the things that were said to you back then were said to you today, you would be like, no.
Absolutely. The things that I heard in those boardrooms, the things that I heard from the model editors, I mean, just outright racist, like not even pretending to. And even though, yes, I was a Black woman in this white space, it kind of, this thing started happening where it was like, well, she's here, so maybe she's not really Black. Like she's Black, but like she's one of us, so we can talk like this in front of her. And it was shocking. Shocking. I mean, I could talk about this forever, but then, you know, like Alec Weck came on the scene and everyone felt super liberal suddenly because this model from the Sudan who was bald with beautiful dark skin, it was like, okay, we're all enlightened now, we can all take a breather. Obviously that is not what happened. So yes, anyway, I'm so excited for the young millennials and Gen Z that are coming in here and not feeling like they have to compromise anything about themselves to, you know, make their voices heard.
Yeah, I'm so happy that they do not have to go through the things that we went through,
Lord,
to be successful.
Yes.
Or feel that they have to, which is a great relief to see.
Yes.
But thank you so much, Tia. This was fun and amazing. I'm glad neither of us collapsed into giggles at any point.
But I rambled a lot, and my apologies for that.
It was wonderful. I will, I guess, see you on FaceTime with the kids tonight.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.
Hi, everyone. My name is Morgan Elise Johnson. I'm co-founder of The Tribe, a digital publication based in Chicago with a focus on reshaping the narrative of Black Chicago. I'm excited to moderate today's conversation with Diallo Riddle, who is an actor, writer, director, showrunner, and co-creator of HBO's Southside. Hi, Diallo. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. When you roll off the titles like that, I'm just like, this man can't decide what he wants to do. Yeah, thank you. And I mean, like, thank you for bringing me on, because this is something that we want to talk about. This is absolutely one of the primary reasons that our show Southside exists.
Absolutely. Before we get into Southside, I was curious when I was reading up on you about your history as a moonlighting DJ, because Chicago has such a rich musical history. I'm wondering about what that side of you is about.
It is very true. It's how I paid my bills for, gosh, almost 10 years from the time I got to college. And then sometime after that, it was absolutely how I paid all my bills, because, you know, the short version of the story is just that we wanted to throw, like, you know, parties to raise money for our college organizations. And we were always spending most of our money on hiring the DJs. And, you know, I was at Harvard. There weren't a lot of Black DJs in the Boston area that were any good. There was one guy, he charged so much money, he would eat up all of our fundraising profits. And so I went down to Roxbury and bought a bunch of 12 inches. This is the 90s. So I went down there and probably bought, like, you know, Mobb Deep, Common, back when he was Common Sense, you know, like I bought a bunch of 12 inches and I bought just enough to handle one party. And then I got bit by the DJ bug. And even though I wasn't a good DJ, you put in your time and your reps. By the early 2000s, I was graduated and I was DJing in Los Angeles for a living, you know, while I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. So believe it or not, I was actually DJing a friend's wedding last night. So it's still something I get called upon to do from time to time, even though it's not my primary source of income anymore.
Wow. I'd like to say that I'm an aux cord DJ, so I'm like the official DJ of my family. So
there you go.
Whenever there's a party going on, a barbecue, I'm DJ Mo. Actually,
hey, it's very, look, that's completely legit, and I find that you know, the phones, the apps, the platforms like Spotify, they're getting really good at it, and I think pretty soon it's going to be hard to be any kind of DJ making any kind of living when people can build like these amazing playlists that are exactly what they want. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's a subject for another time. But yeah, I'd love to talk about the dwindling number of DJs, working class DJs who can actually afford to just be DJs. Like, there's like the $6 million, you know, dollars a year and up DJs who like do Vegas and all the big music festivals. And there used to be like a solid middle class of DJs, and that's pretty much going away. It's really wild to watch.
okay, so you talked about how you got into DJing while you were
in
studying
college,
at Harvard. So tell me about starting this journey with your creative partner, Bashir Salahuddin. Yeah, like, why did you choose storytelling? You know, you went to Harvard, and I can imagine there's so many things that you could have decided to focus on.
Yeah, and I focused on a lot of them. You know, the thing about it is that when I look back on my life now, I think storytelling is the first thing that I did. You know, when I was in kindergarten, I wrote a book called The True History of Dinosaurs. And it was rampant plagiarism. I just copied my favorite sentences out of all my favorite dinosaur books and put them into my book. But, you know, and then I drew all the illustrations. So that was me. But, you know, they put it in my, you know, elementary school library as a book you could check out. It had like so I felt like I had been published, you know, from the age of 5. And then like when I was in 3rd grade, I wrote a 50-page novel about a Black spy in World War II. And they put that in that elementary library. So I think I figured out very early on that I wanted to tell stories. What got confusing was the kind of stories that I wanted to tell. When I was at Harvard, I was in history, and I was a history major, and I thought I wanted to do nonfiction. But it was really, I think it was a couple of things happened. You know, I spent a summer out in LA and really like, you know, living in Los Angeles where my sister was working in Hollywood. And, you know, like I said, I started DJing. So I was like, you know, having a great time in the nightlife. And just over time, I found myself returning to stories based on the things I saw and the characters I met, you know, out there in LA nightlife. Bashir, you know, after graduation, he went to acting. He went to like an acting, it wasn't like an acting grad school, but, you know, like I told him how much fun I was having in LA. And so he moved out there, and then we just started writing scripts together. You know, my mom was like, you guys are so funny when I hear you guys talking, like, why don't you guys start writing that down? And that was a revolutionary concept for me, because I'd always figured I was going to eventually go back to writing like serious, you know, liturgical kind of stuff. And that's not what ended up happening. You know, me and Bashir started writing stuff together. We started doing a sketch comedy show. Our first sketch comedy group was called Cleo's Apartment. I look back on that group, it's a monster of an old lineup. Like nobody had done anything at the time, but it was me, Bashir, Robin Thede, Wyatt Cenac, Nefertari Spencer, who plays Keisha on Southside, our friend Angela, Nika King, who plays Zendaya's mom on Euphoria. Like that was our clique. That was our group of friends. And we stood that sketch show up for about a year before we all went our separate ways. Robin and Wyatt went off and did their thing. Me and Bashir went off and started doing web series. And eventually that web series got us noted by the people who were hiring for a show called Chocolate News, which was David Allen Greer's Comedy Central show. And when we got that show, we bounced out of there straight over to Fallon. Fallon was like the first real big hit show that we worked on. We were there for 4 years, which is crazy to say. Like, we were there as long as we were in college, you know, but we were at Fallon for 4 years, got to meet all our heroes and got to work with the Roots. And then we came out to LA to do our own TV show. And we spent another 4 years developing a show about Atlanta, where I'm from. You know, Bashir's from Chicago. He graduated from Whitney Young. I am from what I call the South Side of Atlanta, which is, you know, Southwest Zone 4. And, you know, we had a lot of similar experiences growing up. So we spent 4 years trying to develop that Atlanta show at HBO. At one point, Donald Glover was attached to our show. as was Maya Rudolph and Jaden Smith and a bunch of cool people, Finesse Mitchell. And then we looked up at some point and they weren't going to do the show. And we were heartbroken. And Bashir was like, you know what? Why don't we do a show about my hometown, Chicago? And then that was when we decided to do that. Because, you know, before we started this interview, you told me something that means a lot to me, which is that, you know, part of your mission is to give a accurate description of Chicago and not let it be demagogued by people who want to present it as like, oh, it's death, it's crime, it's all these things. You know, when you meet somebody from Chicago, they love Chicago. Like there's a different level of love that people have for certain cities, and Chicago is absolutely one of them. And they wouldn't have that love if it was just the death and chaos that is presented by Black politicians and, you know, some of the music and some of the shows that are out there. So we decidedly wanted to present the Chicago that Bashir grew up in and loved. You know, we wanted to do, it's not that we're trying to paint a prettier picture than what's there. In some ways, we feel like our show is every bit as accurate as some of the other shows. We're just showing another side of the life that's there. And does it have challenges? Yes, but you know, just like Southwest Atlanta, like people go back there and raise their family there and invest in these neighborhoods because they love them. And we just wanted to show that it's got way more love than a lot of people have been trying to portray.
For everybody listening, Diallo did something that is very Chicago. When you spoke of Bashir, you mentioned the high school that he went to.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, because I'm telling you, like
anybody else, but like that's a very Chicago thing.
Listen,
there's so much pride in the high schools.
I'm telling you, and that's why we knew if we did the South Side Chicago right, we would find fans all over the country. When I talk to people from, like I said, when I talk to people from Atlanta, you know, you could be from South Side Chicago, Southwest Atlanta, you could be from South Central Los Angeles, the South Bronx. Whenever you go to these communities where Black people live, some of the first things that comes out is, where'd you go to high school? You know, and if you're my age group, you always find out like, and which mall did you go to? Because that's always a big thing when you grow up. Like if you're from Atlanta, it's Greenbrier, but you know, if it's another city, you don't know where it is. But high school is just a big thing. It sort of says, yeah, I grew up there, and also this is where I spent my formative years. You know, again, because you know, right. we make a lot of jokes about Kenwood on South Side. You know what I mean? Like we got to go there. So yeah. High school is very important.
Very important. I'm actually from the North Chicagoland area, so I don't mention high school because I know Chicagoans will on me like, you did not grow up here. So I have to do the disclaimer of just like, okay, the other co-founder of the tribe is from K-Town, the West Side. So that's what we go hard for over here. And when you were starting out and working with your friends and things like that, were you thinking in terms of a certain mission or goal? Were y'all like, we're about to take over?
Yeah, we thought we were going to take over. You know, this is when we were all in our late 20s. We thought we were going to take over the world. And and it's funny to look back because I think at the time we were like, we're going to be not the Tyler Perry type of Black thing. Like there wasn't a whole lot of it out there. I don't think Key and Peele was probably only one season old when we started working out on that, and Wyatt hadn't done the Daily Show yet, and Dee Dee hadn't done all the great things that she's gone on to do. Like, no, we were just all young, scrappy, and hungry. Like we knew that we had a different sound and a different cadence to our comedy than anything that was out there. You know, you know, I for whatever reason at the time, we thought that we were, you know, gonna, you know, replace sort of like the Tyler Perry, you know,
the caricature kind of.
Yeah, and you know what's funny is, and maybe this is just a fact, now that I'm older, I give Tyler so many props because it's just like, it's hard to be a Black creator and do anything, much less be a person who can greenlight your own movies. Like now I have so much respect for what he's been able to build. And regardless of whether, you know, you love his movies or his TV shows or whether you don't, or you know, everybody's got their own taste. But I think just from a business point of view, it's really hard to not respect what he's been able to build. But that said, yeah, when we started off, we were the young, you know, kind of kids in the back of the room throwing the paper airplanes and saying, we're about to tear all this up, you know. And I think we're just happy that everybody's been able to go on and do something, you know, special in their career, regardless.
So let's get into that a little bit though. So how do you feel like Southside's comedy differs from that?
Not comparing it to any other show, what we try to do with our show is, replicate some of the chaotic, fun silliness of some of our favorite comedies. I always say that, because we get a lot of comparisons to The Office, which makes sense because we take place in a workplace, and The Office is sort of like a workplace comedy. But really what we're trying to do is The Simpsons. On The Simpsons, everything that happens in the city of Springfield can pop up on the screen. And so we sort of use the South Side as our Springfield. So, that's why we have my character's an alderman. We've got, Bashir playing a police officer with his real life wife, Chandra Russell, who plays Officer Turner. We've got the guys who work at RTO. We've got Chase, the white dude who's, randomly in the neighborhood. We got Travis, the aspiring rapper. Like, we go out of our way to sort of build a whole universe of characters. I mean, I think the first 2 seasons of the show had something like 170 speaking parts each season. Like, we have no problem just sort of, giving really funny lines and moments to characters that you may not see again, or you may see them again in a different space. But we just really go out of our way to try to build this universe that I love the fact that people think this is funny because, again, it's like The Simpsons. It's like our town. It's building this universe where we can literally pop into any place in the South Side and come up, and be confronted with, just a really funny character, a funny, unexpected character. We have Dorothy Brown, who's part of that civil rights generation. And then you've got, the Hoodoo Man, who's basically a psychic reader who may not have any psychic ability whatsoever. These are the colorful characters that, grow up, when you're growing up in these communities you meet. Because we always say, I knew an astronomer in the neighborhood. That's not some stuff that you'd ever hear on the evening news, but those people exist in these communities, and we want to do that. We want to show that.
What I really love about Southside is that it doesn't attempt to translate Blackness for anybody. It is just authentically Black, probably one of the Blackest shows I've ever seen.
Thank
and
you. That means so much.
Authentically Chicago. It's like a big inside joke between Chicagoans that not everyone is going to get. Like, my father is a pastor, and I grew up in the Baptist church. So tornado episode, they're doing the church play, it had me screaming and crying because it was
we have wanted to do a church play episode for well, that's why me and Bashir directed that episode, because we've been talking about a church play episode for so long. We were just like, we got to do this. I can't believe I didn't bring this up earlier when you mentioned you're from the North Side. I am the only person on the writing staff who is not from Chicago. Everybody else is. All the writers that we hired, they're all Chicagoans. One of them is from the North Side, and they give him a lot of trash for that. So you're not alone in that sense. Most of the rest of them are all, Inglewood and Harvey, and just, they're all, very South Side, except for him. And I want to say he grew up like near Wrigleyville or something. Like, they give him a lot of shit.
Let me just say, the suburbs, we can't say anything about Chicago unless we're famous, because like Virgil Abloh, may he rest in peace, he's from Rockford, but then Chicagoans claim him, like Keke Palmer is from Robbins way out south, but like she's a Chicagoan now.
Yeah, exactly. You got to prove yourself, and then they'll claim
prove yourself before the city will really claim you. You got to be thorough, okay? Very much.
But also, I would even say, like, our cast, like, if you think about the 5 series regulars on the show, they're all Chicagoans, grew up there. And until, I think, season 2, the twins still lived on the South Side. I think that they just moved. But, I guess what I'm saying is that these are people who collectively have had 200 years of living on the South Side. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Lived experience.
Exactly.
What advice do you have for young Black creatives who want to make unapologetically Black shows in this industry?
Shoot it yourself. I get asked all the time, hey, I want to come right on Southside because I'm from Chicago and I'm funny. And I respect that. I respect the hustle. I respect people shooting their shot, but really we have a very limited number of seats at that table. You know what I'm saying? I think we have like 9 writers. I don't think we'll ever get up to like, some shows have like 20 writers. We'll never be that show. What I always say is just do what me and Bashir did, and you don't even have to be from any particular walk of life or city or whatever. Like, whatever makes you laugh and whatever show you would like to see on TV, just start writing it. And then everybody's got a movie studio, in their pocket. Like, get the phone, shoot with your friends, edit it, post it on YouTube. I guarantee you'll watch it 6 months from now. You'll be like, I wish I'd done this differently. I wish I'd done that differently. Bashir and I come from the same world that Issa Rae came from, who's now a pretty good friend of ours. Like, we went out and we shot it ourselves, and then we posted it on YouTube. And again, you will get better at it. You'll also decide like what you're good at, what you're not good at. And maybe eventually one of your friends decides he wants to be a director, or she decides, I'm more of a actress, I'm gonna have this other person write it for me. But like, just do it. You don't have to even go to film school anymore, I don't think. I mean, it's nice if you have that luxury, but if you don't, like, just know that we talk to and interview people all the time, trying to make the videos that they've shot become TV shows. We try to, because we have a development deal now. We're trying to bring more voices, bring out more shows that make us laugh. And
congratulations to you on that.
Oh yeah, thank you. I mean, like that, I feel like that's been a game changer in the sense that we have a home where we can, use as a launching pad to get more funny, and most of it's funny. I mean, I'll say that, like, I feel like drama is a very different path. I can't really speak to that path. With comedy, I know that there are a couple of different ways. You can do improv at some of the theaters. You can, start a sketch group, or you can drama is just a little bit different, but this is all a long-winded way of saying, shoot it yourself, edit it, get it tight, post it, and just keep going. And you'll get those 10,000 reps. It's just like me DJing. Like, I didn't start off, I was actually the worst DJ on campus when I started off, but I got better because I kept doing it. And it's just like a muscle. It's just like, athleticism. Like, if you start shooting your own stuff, you'll get better and better and better. You might even start building up a fan base. We had a small fan base. Issa had a huge fan base for Awkward Black Girl after a while, and then you come to the table with these Hollywood execs and you're not begging them to give you money, because the more you have to beg, the more stipulation, the more that they're going to like require stuff. Right? Yeah, you're going to have to find compromises in your vision. No, the more you can arrive and say, hey, this is what it is. This is what we did. You can watch it. If you're interested, let's do it. There are just enough people now who, like, we got a deal. Didi's got a deal with Warner Brothers. Like, you've got to come ready to do it. And I think the best way to be ready to do it is having done it. And the way to do that is just, like I said, shoot with your friends. When it was me, Robin, Didi, Bashir, and that whole crew, none of us were famous. None of us had like a contact that we were going to work. I think Nefertari worked for Bernie Mac. God rest his soul, he gave us $800 to buy the wigs and the costumes for our first sketch show. And by the way, at the time, that $800 might as well have been $1 million, because we didn't have $800 to buy anything for that sketch show. Like, it's not bad to have somebody who you can call on like that to help you out in a pinch, but at the end of the day, we had to go out there and we had to do it. So I can't stress that enough. If you really want to work in this field, start writing, start filming, start editing. Don't just film a whole bunch of stuff and then never find an editor to deal with it. And then start posting, because if you have something that's, worth our time, people will watch it and people will reach out to you. I'll say this about my man Cooper, who did Bel Air. Everybody knows the story now. He shot it really well. Will Smith saw it, and now he's got a show. You know what I'm saying? So, it happens. You just got to use all the tools that we have nowadays to do it.
What's been the most rewarding part of this journey so far for you?
I'm gonna tell you a really honest answer. My family. Like right now, like I'm in a house that I love, that we just purchased. My kids are happy, they're in school. To be an artist and to be able to pay for yourself is not easy. And I think that is I am very grateful for that. So yes, on the one hand, I'm most happy from a creative point of view that we have a show like Southside, we have a show like Sherman Showcase, we have more shows coming, hopefully this year, for people to watch. But at the end of the day, sometimes I'm just still that kid who grew up, pretty broke, Southwest Atlanta, and I'm just amazed that I can feed and clothe my family and be happily married for 13 years and just doing what we're doing. I see a lot of talented people who sort of get passed by over and over, and I try and help them out by putting them on our show and trying to put them on. I'm working with some on some TV shows, but it's not easy to make a living in this business if you literally put in all your chips on this business. But I feel very grateful, very blessed and honored that we're able to do the shows that we do and still are able to, like I said, feed and clothe our family. I know that's mad basic, but that's the truth.
I want to thank you again for being here today. We are celebrating Capital B's launch with the theme centering Black stories. I did it in 2017 with my best friend, Tiffany Walden, when we co-founded the Tribe to reshape the narrative of Black Chicago. Southside is helping to reshape that narrative by showing the authentic Southside and all of its color and fullness. So thank you so much for what you're contributing to Black narratives, and thank you for supporting Capital B today.
Thank you for having me, and much love to Capital B and the Tribe.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Glory Adam, author and host of the Well-Read Black Girl podcast. I'm really excited to be joined by Clint Smith. Clint is a writer and the author of How the Word Was Passed. Thank you for joining us, Clint. I have read your book over and over. I actually did it twice, once on audio, and then I did it, I had to highlight everything in it because I just was so moved by your language and the beauty of the story. For those who have not read the book yet, How the Word Is Passed is about cities in the South, as well as New York and Senegal, and their relationship to American slavery and how we can reconcile those experiences and histories. And you do such a thorough job of researching and really understanding the depth of what happened in our American history. I'd like to really start at the beginning. How did you decide to write this book, and why was it so important?
Yeah, for me, in part, the origin story of the book is that in 2017, I was watching several Confederate statues come down in my hometown in New Orleans. So statues of PGC Beauregard, Jefferson Davis, Robert E. Lee. And I was watching these statues come down, and I was thinking about what it meant that I grew up in a majority Black city in which there are more homages to enslavers than there are to enslaved people. And what are the implications of that? What does it mean that to get to school, I had to go down Robert E. Lee Boulevard? To get to the grocery store, I had to go down Jefferson Davis Parkway. That my middle school was named after a leader of the Confederacy. That my parents still live on a street today named after somebody who owned over 150 enslaved people. Because the thing is, we know that symbols and names and iconography aren't just symbols. They're reflective of the stories that people tell. And those stories shape the narratives that communities carry. And those narratives shape public policy, and public policy shapes the material conditions of people's lives. And that's not to say that taking down a 60-foot tall statue of Robert E. Lee is going to suddenly erase the racial wealth gap. But it is to say that all of these things help us recognize the ecosystems of ideas and stories and history that give us an understanding of the sort of larger context of American history and how certain communities have been disproportionately harmed throughout that history. And so I was looking around my city, looking around my home, and thinking about, well, how does this city that I grew up in, that was at one time the largest slave market in the country, how is it telling the truth about itself or failing to tell the truth about itself? What are the places that are doing a good job of reckoning with that history, and the places that are failing to reckon with that history? And I sort of just began to broaden those questions out beyond my home into the country, right? To try to explore what the public memory and public consciousness of slavery looked like in different cities and different historical sites, at these plantations, museums, memorials, monuments, and really was interested in the heterogeneity and expansiveness and diversity of the ways that this story is told, which I think reflects the diversity, both the good and the bad, of the way that it's remembered.
It's very interesting because this conversation is entitled The Power of Black Stories. And I would love to hear your definition of power, especially in the context of you traveling and having these conversations. And in a lot of ways, redefining the authority of who has the right to shape history and change the American canon. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, for me, part of the power of Black stories is recognizing the expansiveness of Black stories, right? Recognizing that it is incredibly important to tell the story of the way that Black people have been oppressed, marginalized, and experienced violence, not just interpersonally, but at the hands of the state, like state-sanctioned violence for centuries over the course of this country's history. It's important to take that seriously, because if we don't, and we don't excavate it, and we don't talk about it, then we fall into the trap of looking around and thinking that the reason one community looks one way and another community looks another way is somehow because of the people in those communities, and not because of what has been done to those communities generation after generation after generation. With that said, I think it would also be reductive to singularly tie the story of Black life in this country to the violence that Black folks have experienced, right? So it's the sort of both andness of it. It's a recognition that we have to tell the stories of what happened to us, but also a recognition that we have to tell the stories of what we did anyway, and what we contributed anyway, and what we built anyway, what we built in spite of those things. Which is why I think, it's important to have media and content and literature, as you always talk about, that has stories that outline with great detail and specificity this history, and also that are stories of Black people becoming scientists and little Black kids fighting dragons. And like, when I think about the kind of things I want in my own kids' library, I want the stories, we have the stories of Harriet Tubman, we have the stories of Frederick Douglass and John Lewis and Martin Luther King, and we also have the story of like the little girl whose best friend is a mouse, and the little boy who like loves ice cream, because all of it is us. And I think the power of Black stories is recognizing that all of those stories need to be told.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful thing to share the beauty and the joy and the rebellion and the pain. Like, all of those things matter. It's not just one thing. It's so multifaceted. And your book does this incredible job of sharing the breadth of our experience. I'm curious, how did you know where to begin? Because there's just so much. And I was taken by the even how you came to the title. Can you share that with the audience? It's very clear in the book, but how that even came to be. The title is so powerful.
Yeah, so the title comes from one of the places that I visited was Monticello Plantation. Monticello, people will know because Jefferson was the third president of the United States, one of our founding fathers. And Jefferson is interesting for me because I think he, in so many ways, is a microcosm for the story of America, in the sense that America is a place that has provided unparalleled, unimaginable opportunities for upward mobility for millions of people across generations in ways that their ancestors could have simply never imagined. Mm-hmm. And it has also done so at the direct expense of millions and millions of other people who have been intergenerationally subjugated and oppressed. And both of those things are the story of America. It's not one over here and one over there. It's like they're both entangled in one another. And I think Jefferson similarly is someone who personifies that cognitive dissonance, those contradictions. He wrote, one of the most important documents in the history of the Western world, and also enslaved over 600 people over the course of his lifetime, including 4 of his own children. He wrote in one document that all men are created equal, and wrote in another document that Black people are inferior to whites in both endowments of body and mind. And so when I go to Monticello, part of what I'm trying to understand is, how does this place that was created to, to reckon with and take into account and present Jefferson's legacy, what version of the story are they telling about Jefferson? Are they recognizing, as I think they have come to, that you can't tell the story of Jefferson as a scholar, as a president, as a statesman, as a scientist, without also telling the story of him as an enslaver? Because it was his life as an enslaver that made possible everything else. Mm-hmm. With that said, part of what I'm also interested in is not only how this Monticello tells the story of Jefferson, but also the enslaved families who also lived there, right? 400 enslaved people lived at Monticello over the course of Jefferson's lifetime. And, you know, the Hemmingses, the Grangers, the Fawcett's, the Hearns, are their stories being told? You know, because in many ways, this land belongs to them just as much, if not more, than it belongs to Jefferson. They built families here. They created memories here. They built the infrastructure on that land. They cultivated that land. And one of the ways that Monticello does this is through what's called the Getting Word Oral History Project. And so there's a recognition that because of the way that slavery worked and the way it prevented, in a systemic way, Black people from having access to learn how to read and write, there aren't a lot of documents. People weren't writing each other letters necessarily, in terms of like your ordinary enslaved person. And so the stories of what life was like for families is passed down through the oral tradition, right? It's passed down through oral histories and oral stories. And in the Getting Word Oral History Project, I came across a quote from one of the descendants of someone who was enslaved at Monticello. And he was saying, talking about the way that he heard the story, learned the story of life at Monticello from his grandmother, who learned it from his grandfather, her grandfather, who learned it from, you know, and that is how it has always been passed. And he said, this is how the word is passed down. And there are some times when you're a writer, when you just like, the title just like, bam, you just see it and you're like, all right, this is it. And I knew as soon as I saw that phrase, how the word is passed captured so much of what I was trying to excavate in this book, and so many of the things that I was trying to wrestle with. So, you know, you don't always get the title right on the first time, but I got this one right, I think.
It is perfect. You got it absolutely right. And it speaks such volumes to what we're doing, what your book is doing, but what we do as individuals. In the book, you also talk to your grandparents and you share your family history. Can you share what that experience was like and what surprised you? Were there things that you were expecting, or there things that you just like had no kind of idea that it would come and be placed into your own story for others to read?
You know, I think what led to interviewing my grandparents and having those conversations with them was this recognition that I had spent 4 years traveling around the country, asking strangers these like really intimate questions about their lives. And I realized there was a moment where I was like, I don't think I've ever been this intentional with my own family. Like I think I'm learning more about these people that I might never see again than I know about my own parents and grandparents' childhoods and stories. And so I went to the National Museum of African American History and Culture with my grandparents. You know, my grandfather born in 1930, Jim Crow, Mississippi, my grandmother born in 1939, Jim Crow, Florida. And we're walking through this museum. I'm pushing my grandfather in his wheelchair with his cane across his lap. My grandmother is walking a few paces ahead of us. And we're looking around this museum. And I had this moment where I realized that so much of the history that is documented in this museum, so much of the violence that is documented in this museum are things that they experienced firsthand, things that they were intimately proximate to. And I think part of what that also did was help me understand our collective proximity to this history. Not just part of what the book is trying to do is think about our collective physical proximity to this history, right? How the scars of slavery are etched into the landscape all around us. But in doing so, and especially in the conversation and time with my grandparents, it was a reminder of our temporal proximity to this history, that this history we tell ourselves was a long time ago, wasn't that long ago at all. The woman who opened the National Museum of African American History and Culture alongside the Obama family in 2016 was the daughter of an enslaved person. Not the granddaughter, not the great-granddaughter, she was the daughter of someone born into slavery. My grandfather's grandfather was enslaved. So sometimes I think about my 4-year-old son sitting on my grandfather's lap, and I imagine my grandfather sitting on his grandfather's lap. And I'm reminded again that this history we tell ourselves was a long time ago really wasn't that long ago at all. And my grandmother, when I was asking her about our trip to the museum, she had this refrain that had just stuck with me. And she kept saying, I lived it, I lived it, I lived it, you know? And I just think about the world they were born into and everything they've seen. And you know, for me, I always, when I talk to groups of teachers, I always say, if I had a magic wand, I could make every history and social studies teacher do one thing, it would be to get kids to do oral history projects. I mean, I'm 33 now, and, you know, I'm glad I realized that I should do this before my maternal grandfather and paternal grandmother passed away. I also wish I had done it when my other two grandparents were alive. You know, like what more would I have learned about them and their lives? But I think it would be really valuable for young people to get a sense of their own proximity to people who have lived through really profound moments of American and global history. And I think it's really important too for the person being interviewed, because it allows them to sort of unearth some things that they might not have thought about in a while.
When you decided to travel to Senegal, what inspired that? And what did you learn in Senegal that you might not have learned here if you had only done your research in the United States?
It felt important to me to go. I'd studied abroad in Senegal in college, and I spent a semester in between Dakar and Kédougou, which is a village in the sort of outskirts of the country. And I remember going to the door of no return on Gorée Island, and I remember how you can feel the history in your body, right? Like you stand in Gorée Island, you stand at the House of Slaves, you stand in the door of no return, and you look out into the sort of vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, and you just imagine the Middle Passage and the capturing of Africans in an entirely different way, which I think is the case in every place that I went, right? Like part of going to a place physically is that you experience the history physically, like you feel it in your bones. And I think that I just got really curious. I mean, this book is a book that is largely governed by my curiosities. Part of it is I think I followed, the book told me how it wanted to be written. I think you write your proposal years before, and you think you have an idea of like, I'm going to go to this place and that place and that place, and then you end up going to places very different sometimes than you anticipated, or experiencing them in very different ways than you anticipate. But going to Senegal was important for me because I wanted to understand to some extent how slavery was thought about or talked about in the place where it began, in the sense that like people were captured in Africa and then sent to the New World. And that makes it a part of the sort of ecosystem of that horror. And I was curious about what the conversations look like in Senegalese schools, in Senegalese culture. And what I realized is, there's such a profound relationship between the history of slavery and the history of colonialism. And there are so many moments. I mean, just for example, I always remember the moment I was with Momar, who's a journalist I spent time with over there. And we were walking down the streets of Gorée, and there was a street named after a famous French colonizer. And he was like, you all are trying to decide whether or not to take down the names of people who enslaved you, and we're having the same conversation about why do we have these street names and statues of people who colonized us. And so it was a reminder for me of the way that even there are like geographic distinctions and specificities in any given place, but there also is the common sort of thread of the way that anti-Black racism manifests itself in different parts of the world, and the connections you're able to make between these different parts of history.
As a scholar, how do you think the conversation around anti-racism and white supremacy has evolved? Because I don't know if this book would have been received the same way 10 years ago, 5 years ago. Like the landscape politically has changed, and there seems to be a different understanding and wanting to really comprehend the magnitude of what American slavery has done. We've always been having this conversation, but in this point of history, it feels like it's something new is happening. Would you agree with that? And do you think that your work is hopefully shifting the conversation?
I mean, I'd say first, I hope that my book is just, it is just one contribution amid like an incredible ocean of information and books and content that people are putting out into the world in ways that I'm just honored to be a part of. I do absolutely think that there's been a shift in public consciousness. I largely attribute that to the Black Lives Matter movement. And I think like this doesn't happen without the activists and the organizers in cities across the country who for the last 10 years, I mean, Trayvon Martin was killed 10 years ago, who for the last 10 years have pushed this country to see itself more clearly. And I think what happens and it's the same thing if you go back and look at the civil rights movement, what happens is that activists and organizers are doing the work that they do, the incredibly important work, and it opens up space for a new conversation to be had because people are now searching for context and information to help explain how we got here. And so it is no coincidence that you have books by Black writers and scholars and people writing about the sort of sociological and historical context that have shaped what racial disparities look like today, because what the activists in the Black Lives Matter movement, broadly speaking, have created a space for writers and scholars and artists and filmmakers and all sorts of folks to enter the conversation and be received, because now there is a new there's a new appetite. And so, and what I think is true is that you've had a shift. Millions of people now understand the history of this, like the history of racism, as not something, or understand racism not just as something that's an interpersonal phenomenon, but a systemic one, a structural one, a historical one, sociological one. The other side of that is that as millions of people gain a deeper understanding through documentaries they see, through the books they read, through the articles, through all this stuff, the other side of it is that you have millions of Americans who are experiencing like an existential crisis to their sense of self. And that's where this sort of great critical race theory boogeyman comes in, because when a new story of America, a more expansive story, a more honest story of this country is beginning to be told, it calls into question the story that so many other millions of Americans have tied their own identities to. Right? So if your sense of who you believe yourself to be, who your family is, who your community is tied to a story of America that now people are beginning to realize is just half truth, or is a myth, or is completely wrong, then you are not, it's just not a sort of inconvenient need to reassess what you were taught and learn something else. It is a threat to your sense of who you think you are in the world. And like I said, it's an existential threat. And I think that's why you see the intense level of backlash that we're seeing now, where, state legislatures are attempting to prevent teachers from teaching the very history that explains why our society looks the way that it does today. I think always about this 1964 James Baldwin essay, A Talk to Teachers, which is based off a speech he gave to a group of New York City educators in 1963. And he says, the role of the educator is to help the Black child understand that even though the world attempts to tell them that they are criminal, it is the society that created the conditions and the history that created the conditions that the Black child is forced to grow up in that is in fact the criminal. And so that's the tension, right? You have like a history of this country that has told Black children, Black people from marginalized communities that something is wrong with them. And it is their fault that they live the way they do. And now you have more people, not everyone, but more, who are like, no, the reason, like you can, at every moment in history, you can point to something that extracted resources from certain communities and put them in the others, that prevented people from having access to upward mobility or wealth accumulation or certain opportunities, and while also giving those things to others. I mean, it truly at every single point of history, and I think slavery is obviously a major part of that. Slavery existed in this country, or the British colonies that would become this country, for 250 years, and it's only not existed for a little over 150. So to suggest that an institution that existed for a century longer than it hasn't has nothing to do with what the contemporary landscape of inequality looks like, I mean, is deeply morally and intellectually disingenuous.
your work, it really, in my mind, it sits right next to Ibram Kendi and Nicole Hannah-Jones and James Baldwin, so many incredible writers that have shifted the conversation and give us such hope. And I just want to know what is giving you hope right now as you continue to write, as you continue to parent, as you continue to teach. What inspires you to keep going and having these very difficult conversations? What's your light?
The thing I think about all the time is how first enslaved folks were brought to the American British colonies in 1619. Slavery didn't end until 1865. So you had 250 years of the institution, but from the very beginning, people were fighting for freedom. They were fighting for liberation. What that also means is that the vast majority of people who fought for freedom never got a chance to see it for themselves. But they fought for it anyway, because they knew that someday someone would. And I think about how my life is only possible, how my children's life is only possible because of generations of people who fought for something they knew they might never see, but they fought for it anyway because they knew that one day somebody like me might. And I think about what sort of responsibility that bestows upon me, you know, in the work that I try to do to build a better world, that I have to accept that I might not see myself, or that my children might not even see. But you work to build a better world because someday someone will, and because there are people who did that for you. I think of it as like chipping away at this wall. You don't know if the wall is 6 inches thick or 600 miles thick, but you know the more you chip away at it, the less the people who come after you will have to chip away at. And I think that that's part of the Black historical tradition, is that like we are chipping away at the wall because people were chipping away at that wall for us. And I think that's what we do. We sort of we honor that lineage, and recognize that people fought for something for us, and our job is to fight for something for those who are coming after.
This has been such an amazing conversation. I just want to thank you again for your work, your diligence, and the chipping away. I'm right there next to you chipping, and we're doing this as a collective community. So thank you. Thank you to Capital B and this amazing conversation.
Thanks so much, Gloria.
Thank you so much to all of our guests for joining us on stage, and a huge thank you to our sponsor, Reebok, and to you, our audience, for joining us. If you've enjoyed the programming today, sign up for our newsletters. And don't forget, the best way to support Capital B is by becoming a member and following our work. You can do both of those things on our website, capitalbnews.org. We had such a great time introducing you to Capital B Live, and we hope to see you again soon.